Welcome to another edition of the Voice of Palestine, Voice of the Palestinian People. It's February 27, 2014, and I'm your co-host, Hanna Qawas. This week we are interviewing Israeli-Russian director Lia Tarachansky about her documentary On the Side of the Road, which opened the groundbreaking first international film festival on Nakba and Return at Cinematheque Tel Aviv, and will be showing next week at the Franco-German Cultural Center in Ramallah. Lia is also a correspondent with the Real News Network, and we will talk with her about her film work, her journalistic activities, as well as her personal and political journey that brought her here to where she is today. Good night to you, Lia, and welcome to the Voice of Palestine.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Could you tell us a bit about yourself? I mean, your story is fascinating. I read that you were born at a settlement. Could you tell us, about yourself and how did you travel the journey to where you are now?
Sure. It's a bit of a convoluted story, but I was born actually in the Soviet Union just 6 years before it fell apart, and then we came to Israel.
Yeah.
We almost immediately moved to a settlement called Ariel, which is right in the middle of the West Bank, and is one of the biggest settlements. It's a secular settlement. At that time, it was mostly populated by Russians like us.
Yeah.
And it's built particularly in the middle between Nablus and Ramallah to cut the West Bank in two, according to Ariel Sharon's plan. And so I grew up in Israel in that settlement. And eventually in 2000, when the Second Intifada broke out, we moved to Canada, where I did university and became a journalist and started working for the Real News Network, with whom I eventually returned to Israel, Palestine, to become their correspondent here.
Yeah.
At the same time, I started working on a film which evolved into On the Side of the Road. It's been a very long process. It's been 4.5 years of working on this film's production. And I'm very happy that we finished it, and it evolved with me politically, of course. It evolved with me into a very personal story. And it's a film about how Israelis see the biggest taboo in our society and think about this taboo and deny this taboo. And the taboo is the foundation of the State of Israel and the mass dispossession of Palestinians in 1948 until today. And it's a film that tells that story through the eyes and the stories of the people who did the dispossessing, veterans of that war of 1948, and settlers like me who personally displaced people with our existence in the West Bank. And because it's such a personal film, it was a very painful process for a lot of the people who participated in it. And I think that it reflects how painful and how hard it is for Israelis to really tackle the root of the conflict and the root of this insecurity that we have with having created a state that is supposed to be Jewish and democratic, and in reality is neither really Jewish nor democratic.
Yeah, you are touching on also a sensitive subject, like you said. Even the Knesset passed a law, or did they, about commemorating in Nakba is a crime, basically, is it? Or am I wrong?
I think if your only source of information is the media, Israel and Israeli society and the laws that have passed in the last few years under this now most right-wing government we've ever had seems far more extreme and far more repressive than it really is. And I think that it's there are two processes happening at the same time. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, the leadership is becoming a lot more expressive, and the extremist elements in the leadership are becoming a lot more smart in institutionalizing their ideology.
Yeah.
At the same time, there's a huge movement that is happening on the street, a movement of opening and sort of de-tabooizing the biggest taboos in our society. And these things are happening at the same time. So in 2011, a law that became known as the Nakba law passed. And the law says that any organization that gets funding from the state, be it a human rights organization or a school, that commemorates on the Day of Independence the creation of Israel as a tragedy, will get a certain amount of funding defunded. Yeah. And what it means to commemorate the creation of the state of Israel as a tragedy is not that the existence of Israel is a tragedy, although I know that there are people who think that, but that to commemorate the mass displacement that happened for that state to exist, to commemorate the biggest national trauma the Palestinians have witnessed and have experienced, being the Nakba in 1948. To commemorate that tragedy became something that was criminalized. But the funny thing is, as usual, and this is why I say that at the same time there's this movement happening on the streets, this law turned this taboo into something that the media had to talk about because the law was brought forward. So the media was talking about it. The word Nakba became a word in Hebrew. And it really backfired in many, many ways for the right wing, because all of a sudden, all of the press and all of the public sphere was talking about this law. And of course, if you talk about the Nakba law, you have to say, well, what is the Nakba? And then when you start explaining what is the Nakba, you start explaining that there was a huge ethnic cleansing that happened. And when you start explaining that, the natural question is, well, was it legitimate? What does it mean? What actually happened? And so this history, which for 65 years was repressed and systematically removed from every textbook and basically ignored and silenced, became a major part of the public discourse. And the result of that is, of course, the exact opposite of what the right wing wanted.
They do that all the time. I mean, they did it with Voice of Palestine. We came on the air 26 years ago. They made a big fuss about it, and they called us the same things they have it in their Hasbara book, anti-Semites, and and that we are describing Israel as an apartheid state, and etc., is really anti-Semitism. But in the process, they really made us known, because papers wrote about us from Halifax to Victoria, all across Canada. Without them, nobody would have heard about us. And sometimes they do us a good service, and this is just one of the examples. But I wanted to ask you, before go into the details of your film, the documentary, I mean, there is so-called negotiations going on now to have peace in the Middle East. Do you think peace is possible without talking about the core issues like the Nakba and what happened in 1948 and what Beit Halahmi called it in his book, The Original Sin?
Well, I mean, I don't know what you mean exactly. I mean, leaders are never going to be talking about the core issues. That's not what leaders do. The public is talking about the core issues. The public has been talking about the core issues and is talking about the core issues constantly. It's a process that is affecting every element in the Palestinian and in the Israeli society on a daily basis. It's a struggle that is as permanent as, people being fired from universities and textbooks being rewritten, and as little and nuanced as, conversations around a dinner table and asking your grandfather where he was when his, members of his generation were expelling and massacring, etc. So this discussion is happening. It's not happening on as big a level as we would want, and it's not happening in the way that I would want, on a national level yet, of course. That's something that will happen, and no matter what happens with the negotiations, will need to continue to happen for decades afterwards, as we see in other places such as Algeria and Ethiopia and Eritrea and South Africa, etc. These conversations will have to continue to happen long after there is peace. Yeah. I have no doubt that with the negotiations or without them, there will one day be peace, and that peace will necessitate very, very painful conversations, part of which the Nakba is, of course, a central element.
Yeah, but also it's important to have healing and reconciliation, that the party that was responsible for the dispossession of the Palestinians should recognize and admit, like what happened here in Canada, although it was 200 years late, saying, what happened to the indigenous people was wrong, and we apologize for it. It happened here, although...
Yeah, but even in Canada, which you brought up, the Prime Minister of Canada only apologized for the residential schools after the Supreme Court forced him to.
Yeah,
These things don't... no party that is a privileged party is ever going to, out of its own volition, especially not in the way that the world of politics works, admit to something so tragic as the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians of its own volition, regardless of what happens with negotiations. It's something that's going to be part of an agreement that is probably going to be imposed from the outside world, because, as I said, no privileged party will ever, out of its own volition, give up its privileges and admit that its privileges come at the expense of others. That's never happened, and it's not going to happen here, and it's not, from a historical and a basic understanding of politics, that's never going to happen. That's exactly why BDS is having such an impact on Israeli society. So far, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement has had what is financially a marginal success. Symbolically, it's had a huge success all over the world, and of course, in March, we're going to have Israel Apartheid Week in 85 different cities. But as far as a direct, not indirect, but a direct financial cost to Israel, it's been still very marginal. Yet, in the last 3 weeks, there hasn't been a major paper published without at least one major article about the boycott. It's been talked about in every press. Every politician has commented on it. And sincerely, the Minister of Strategic Affairs, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of the Economy are freaking out about it. And the boycott is being treated as a huge threat to the state of Israel, on par now with Iran. And it hasn't even had its big financial impact, such as, national sanctions. So once that happens, and once enough pressure is brought upon Israel to actually, sit at the negotiation table and come to compromises, which we haven't seen yet, then we will see that part of that compromise will, of course, have to deal with the core issues by dealing with the refugees, by dealing with the borders, by dealing with Jerusalem, etc.
That's really well said. And, unless there is a change in the balance of power, which we not really optimistic about fast change because of the the Arab regimes and the support of the Western powers to Israel, and conditional support, and that includes Canada. It's not going to change the balance of power in the Middle East. But we getting, like you said, said, lots of support for the BDS and eventually for the Palestinian people struggle for human rights and for national rights. You talk about certain things in your movie which is a taboo inside Israel, and you showed it in Tel Aviv, I gather. Could you tell us about the reaction to it and the Israeli public? I'm sure they don't know of the details, although many books and material is available on the internet. Do they care to know? Because I don't know if you've seen a statement by Gerald Kaufman, MP from the British Parliament, and he said, unless the Israeli public feels the pain, there won't be any change, and that's why he's going to call, or he's calling for general sanctions against Israel at the level of the United Nations and the level of other Western governments. So do you see there is hope, the Israeli public changing, and what was its reaction to your film?
Well, whether there is hope, I think that's a question that is, as someone who's inside of this conflict, I can't answer, because I need to believe that there is hope. The Palestinian people that I know believe that there is hope, and I feel that I don't have a right to question my hope if they, under their conditions, still have it. And I think in the international sphere, people who care about this place, at the very least, need to give us hope rather than question ours. But yes, the BDS movement has had a disproportionate effect on Israeli society. Whether there is hope for the Israelis, I think that as an Israeli, it's my responsibility to continue to impact my society in however way I can, through art and through journalism and in whatever way that I'm capable of. As I said earlier, I think that it's unrealistic to expect that the biggest propeller of change will be Israeli public opinion. But truthfully, I don't think that it matters. In the end of the day, it's not the public that changes history. In most cases. In most cases, it's events that change the public. And usually these events are irrelevant of public opinion. Public opinion, in fact, catches up much, much later after the change has happened. And I, of course, believe that there's a lot of hope for the Israeli society. I see the Israeli people as good people. I love the society with all my heart, and I believe that once we indigenize the Israelis into the Middle East, the possibilities are endless. And when Israelis learn Arabic and Palestinians learn Hebrew, if they feel that that is necessary, and we are able to travel to Beirut, and people from Beirut are able to travel to Jaffa, and we can have that cultural and social exchange and actually be part of this region, the possibilities are going to be endless, and they're going to be, in my opinion, beautiful. Now, as I said, I don't believe that people should be looking to Israeli public opinion as the engine of change. I think that people should be looking at the geopolitical reality that we're living in right now and realize that Israel-Palestine is today the least important part of the Middle East. It's definitely the most stable part of the Middle East right now. And what's happening in Syria and what's happening in Egypt, what's happening even in Jordan and Lebanon is so much more important to the global powers and to the United States. And what happens in these countries will completely impact and change our reality here in this tiny little piece of land that we live on. And I think that in that context, the BDS movement has a huge potential. And it has a huge opportunity that it cannot miss right now if it wants to succeed. And we're seeing that it's not missing that opportunity, and in fact it's having a huge impact on the Israeli society.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, when people realize what's happening, I mean, most people who are humans and they have feelings, they will really recognize the injustices that happened. It's a general law, but again, I think there is forces who are trying to stop the people from learning about what's happening, and I realize your film is a breakthrough towards that goal. I'm sure there were positive responses when you showed it in Tel Aviv as well as negative. Could you tell us a bit about those?
Of course. So, as I said, the Nakba law really brought the word Nakba into the public sphere and really helped me in my film. By the time I finished the film, so much has been talked about 1948 that where I started 5 years before, where I had to explain what the word Nakba was, and I had to explain what happened in 1948 to where I was, where our society was 5 years later, was a completely different place. Mm-hmm. So, in fact, the right-wing's efforts really helped me in my film. Yeah. It opened in the biggest, most prestigious film theater in the country to a packed audience. It was covered in all of the press, from the far right wing, Channel 7, to Haaretz, and it was wonderful to see how much curiosity there was in the Israeli society towards the film. Of course, there were attempts by one member of parliament, Ayelet Shaked, to have the festival canceled and the film not shown. But the voices that were negative were so marginal and so few and far in between. Mm-hmm. I would have to say that the prominent response has been varied. The film has had every kind of impact on every kind of audience member, and it's been really incredible to watch just how drastically different the responses were. I imagine that for Palestinians it would be a very difficult film to watch, and it is. But still, many Palestinians are, they see the point of the film, and some of them find a lot of inspiration in it. For the Israeli audiences, there's been people that have responded viscerally to it. There have been people that were, they told me that their whole perspective on life has changed watching the film. Mm-hmm. There's people who, many people have had a very strong emotional response to it. And it started a lot of conversations, and to be part of those conversations, to hear them, mm-hmm. Has been eye-opening for me. I knew what the story was that I wanted to tell, but when you are making something as huge as a film, especially one that involves filming people for over the course of 4 years as they change and grow with you and open up to some of their biggest secrets and have to face some of the most awful things that they've done in their lives on camera with you. It is its own thing, and so I knew the story I wanted to tell, mm-hmm. and then there was the story that the film told, and then of course the story that the film told me, and then on top of that there was the story that came when the Israeli audience watched the film, the story of how the film was seen, how it was watched, and how it impacted people. And so far, it's been an absolutely eye-opening, surprising experience for me because I have seen so many different things in the film through the eyes of others that I had never seen myself. And the one thing I would say is that the strongest element of that is that it's a very emotional film. Mm-hmm. It's a film that's not very easy to watch. Yeah. But I think that it's a film that shows what it shows with a lot of love. Yeah. A lot of love and a lot of respect and a lot of patience. And I'm very proud of the people who have participated in the film, mm-hmm. Despite the fact that they've done some horrific things 65 years ago. And one reviewer really summarized that the film achieved what I was hoping it would achieve when she said that the method of the film is not to tell or to educate, but in fact to let others speak and narrate their own stories. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you haven't showed it to a Palestinian audience yet. You're going to show it next week, I believe, or did you show it yet in the Palestinian territories?
I showed it to a Palestinian audience in Rafah, which is inside Israel.
Yeah.
So these are Palestinian citizens of Israel. The first time it will be shown in the West Bank will be on Tuesday.
Yeah. So, next week it's going to be shown in Ramallah, and could you tell us so far how the response to that proposed showing?
Right now, I think people, are on the garden positive comments. We'll see what they say after they watch the film. Yeah, because you said it's really might be emotional for lots of people, especially those who experience the Nakba or their parents experienced it. I wish the film success, and we hope to have it here in Canada, all across Canada. That'll be great. Hopefully, by the end of this year, we're looking forward to seeing it. But I want to move to another subject that you are involved in, that's the real news. We haven't really covered much about the real news website or whatever you call it. It's a show, really. And I watched some whatever programs on it, and I was impressed. Could you tell us a bit about the real news? It's a North American based, is it, Lia, or am I wrong? Yeah, the real news was started by Paul Jay and a collection of Canadian journalists with decades of experience between them in major organizations. Paul Jay was the executive producer and the creator of Counterspin, which was one of the biggest panel discussion shows on Canadian television. It was moderated by Avi Lewis. And then afterwards, he left CBC and decided that the only real way to make news that is independent is to make it financially free from corporate and government funding and to not depend on advertisers. And so he created the Real News in 2003 and built the organization to a point where we started broadcasting daily in 2007. We had a studio in Toronto, which now moved to Washington and then to Baltimore. Mm-hmm. And now we have a huge studio in Baltimore, Maryland, just beside Washington, D.C., with a big studio for 500 audience members. And we've got journalists around the world reporting. I report from Israel, Palestine. There's correspondents from Latin America. And we had a fantastic journalist in Egypt all through the revolution, Jihan Hafiz. And, every once in a while we have contributors from other places, such as Europe, and China, Russia, etc. But for the last 5 years, I've been working with the Real News here in Israel, Palestine, and before that I was working in the Washington, D.C. Bureau. Yeah. And by being independent, we believe that while the Columbia School of Journalism motto is that journalism should comfort the affected and affect the comfortable, real journalism, at least independent journalism, should take it one step further. Yeah. And so for the last 5 years, I've been covering how the occupation functions from the inside, not just its, maybe ugly sides, but what are the mechanisms, what are the systems, who profits from it, and how the political economic system around it has been built, by whom and why, and really going at the context behind the news, whether it's the refugees, whether it's Jerusalem, whether it's any political incident. If the government is claiming that an attack came from Gaza, what is the evidence for that? What is the evidence for the government's weekly bombing, sites? What evidence do we have that these are not civilians, et cetera, et cetera? Going really after the context behind the news and following up, not just what happened, but what happened the day after it happened. Mm-hmm. And so we're not so much a 24-hour news service as much as trying to understand why things happen.
Yeah. No, that's excellent, really. As I said, I watched some shows on it, and they really make a difference. Because, just to give you an example, Ehud Barak today is speaking in Syria, here in BC, at the Economic Summit in Syria, and we issued an open letter to the mayor and the city council in Syria, and we sent it to all the news media, all across the country, and not one single media outlet reported about our open letter. The only ones who interviewed me was Radio India this morning about it, and another Zionist paper talked about it, but that's all the media coverage we had. So obviously, we need our own outlet and our own independent media, and this is the role of the alternative media, and I think we are blessed that we are in the age of the internet. What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. The evolution that journalism has undergone in the age of the internet has been complete. The doors have opened for people who, and from regions and socioeconomical level classes that was closed to them. Their voices have a much bigger projection today than they ever had, and of course we've seen how strongly that can change the world, and with the Arab Spring and with everything that is happening in Europe in the last few years. And so that opened the doors, for better or for worse, to people to hold their authorities in their regions accountable in a whole wide range of ways. Of course, there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of horrible things that are passing off as journalism. And in some ways, as a consumer, you have to work a lot harder today to get at legitimate and accurate sources of information. On the other hand, you have a much bigger platform of a much more accurate and a much wider range of coverage to choose from. So in that sense, you can know what local people in small areas of India and Africa, and China think, and how they report about their own stories. And so in that sense, journalism has gone through a complete revolution, and I think that that's very inspiring, because you can now, as you do, click record, and even on your iPhone, record a radio show and post it on the internet and potentially, impact millions of people.
That's true, yeah. And the most important part of it, that the monopoly was broken. The monopoly of the corporate media is broken on the news
exactly.
and the reporting. So, that's good, and I think it's a positive thing. It's also important, and I'm sure you're aware of it, that the situation in Palestine, Israel, is based on the Zionist ideology that calls for an exclusive, state in Palestine. Netanyahu is still demanding that Israel be a Jewish state only, not for all its citizens. So, I think peace, I see it, is elusive thing with this ideology. I don't think we can have, like you mentioned before, work it out through negotiation, etc., because it's the principle. You can't have a freedom with apartheid in South Africa, and the same thing, you can't have freedom in Palestine with Israeli apartheid. What do you think? Just your final thoughts on the subject, and I'll give you a chance to address our listeners too.
So, what is the question?
Is it possible to have peace and reconciliation with a supremacist ideology like the apartheid state in South Africa used to be, and now with the Zionist state in Palestine? Is it possible to have really peace and reconciliation?
I'm not a person of absolutes, so I'm not going to say yes or no, but I don't care so much how the regime declares itself or defines itself. What I care about is what does it mean on the ground. Mm-hmm. The South African regime has declared that it's now no longer an apartheid state and that all are equal. But when you look at the details of reality and the economy in South Africa today, for many people who are black, the situation is far worse.
I agree.
I'm not saying that it's worse than pre-apartheid, but in fact, the economy is still controlled by whites, more or less, and there are people outside of Johannesburg that are starving to death, and they're all black. Mm-hmm. The state of Israel, if you were to survey the people of Israel, I'm sure that 95 or 99% of the population would tell you that they want to live in a Jewish state. When you ask them what does that mean, you would have 101 different answers, and that's the core of the problem. If we were living in a piece of land where everybody, 100% of the people living in it were Jewish, you wouldn't have to define it as a Jewish state. But we came to a land that was inhabited by an indigenous Palestinian, mostly Muslim, partially Christian, Cherkassi, and Jewish population, and declared that we're having a Jewish state here. And that's the core of the problem. Mm-hmm. To implement that we've passed laws that privilege Jews, that confiscate the properties of non-Jews, and that unequally, by far, redistribute land to Jews. So once that redistribution happens, where access to resources is actually done on a just level and not based on a particular ethnocratic, layered rights, such as we have today, when everyone who is a citizen of this state has absolutely equal rights, which we don't have in Israel today because we don't have a constitution, and because we don't have any law that enshrines equality between citizens. Until that day, we will not be living in a democracy. Mm-hmm. So the question is not so much is peace possible, but can Israel someday be a democratic state?
Mm-hmm. You're right, and I agree with your general analysis, but I see really, you talked about for land ownership, for example, and as long as an institution, a Zionist institution like the Jewish National Fund does exist, I'm wondering if there's going to be peace. We're hoping for peace, and reconciliation and etc. But I think the equality is very much important to have.
Well, it doesn't matter if the Jewish National Fund exists. Yeah. What matters is that it's not given semi-governmental powers.
Yeah.
There are institutions that exist for the sole purpose of the Catholics, for the sole purpose of Muslims, but you don't give them semi-governmental powers.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah, they control most of the land in Israel because they have half of their...
No, they control 13% of the land.
Add to it the Israel Land Authority that they have on it. They appoint half of the board on the Israel Land Authority. The Jewish National Fund appoints half, of the, of the leaders of the authority, the Israel authority, so they control most of it, 93%. But that's again, like you said, it depends on the structure and the government, but it's under the hands of the government and the Zionist movement in general. But this is another topic anyway, and I think I thank you for your thoughts, and that's one of the bases of the BDS movement. Demand for equality, because without it, I don't think we're going to see any progress, not towards peace nor reconciliation, and that's why the BDS movement calls for equality for all the citizens who live in historic Palestine and Israel, in the West Bank and Gaza, etc. I just want to give you one final thought, and also in it, if you could add how people can reach you, and if you could give us some website like the website for Real News Network and a website for your movie, your documentary on the side of the road?
Sure. Well, I really encourage people to go on therealnews.com. There's all kinds of series that up on that website, and even though in the world of news, if it's not today, it doesn't matter. Our stories are 10-minute investigative feature pieces that collectively are a really, really good resource if you want to understand what's happening here, be it the system of land distribution or the system of resource distribution or the system of law that discriminates in its very legislature among different citizens. If you want to understand how things function here, it's a really good resource on the Real News. You can search my name, Tarachansky, Lia Tarachansky, and you will find the stories I've made in the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. And they're all cataloged on my personal website, liatarachansky.com. I also really encourage your listeners to go on the film's website. It's part of the Narrative Productions company, which me and my business partner, Jesse Freeston, have his films from Latin America and my films from here. And that's on narrativeproductions.com, NARETIV productions.com.
Narrativeproduction.com. Okay, that's great. Really, we thank you, Lia, for being with us, and keep up the good work. And I'm sure I'll be following you on the Real News Network. And it was a pleasure talking to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And that was Hannah Kawas talking with filmmaker Lia Tarachansky. And with that, we conclude another edition of The Voice of Palestine. I've been your co-host, Marian Kawas. Our final piece of music is by American folk singer David Rovics, entitled The Key, and we dedicate it to the Palestinian diaspora as they carry on the struggle for their human and national rights.
Let me tell you about a lady known as Grandma to me. She died back in 1982. She liked to tell stories of how things used to be, just like other old ladies do. She talked about her neighbors, Muslims and Christians, Arabs, Britons, and Jews. They'd come over for dinner in her house in Jaffa. They'd talk about business and news. We got along fine a long time ago, before everything started to change. I never imagined back in those days I'd end up here on this firing range. There on a string around her neck, dangling in front of her heart, the key to her home, the key to her people, the key to her world, blown apart. I recall the days well, 1948, the year of the catastrophe. With machine guns and torches, they drove us away to the land of the refugee. We all thought it would pass, but the decades dragged on, and my heart turned to flame. To those who live in my home, where is your conscience? Do you feel the remorse and the shame? to her home, the key to her people, the key to her world, blown apart. Children say the key is theirs and mine, and all over the world we cry for Al-Auda, home in Palestine. Maybe we will prevail, but come what may, as empires fall and rise, nothing will change the memory of the tears in my grandmother's eyes. There on a string around her neck, dangling in front of her heart, the key to her home, the key to her people, the key to her world.